James Harrison sat on the edge of his bed, staring blankly at the clock. The minute hand ticked forward, marking the end of yet another uneventful day. The argument with his wife, Amanda, still echoed in his mind. It wasn't the first time they'd had a disagreement, but this one felt different. More final. The distance between them had grown for months, and tonight had been the breaking point. She was angry, and rightfully so. His recent behavior, late nights at work, endless phone calls, and long silences, had worn her down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. The tension in his chest was becoming suffocating. They had been married for 5 years. In some ways, he thought he knew her better than anyone. And in others, he knew they were both trapped. Trapped in a cycle of hurt and miscommunication. The phone on the nightstand vibrated, jolting him from his thoughts. He picked it up, expecting a text from a colleague or maybe a notification. But there was a missed call. The number was unfamiliar, one he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a moment before dialing the number back. It rang a few times before a voice picked up, smooth and calm, but with an undercurrent of urgency. "Mr. Harrison?" "Speaking." "Who's this?" The voice didn't sound like anyone he knew, but there was something about it that made his heart race. It wasn't just the calmness, it was the tone. There was something off about it. "My name is Dr. Stevens. I need to speak with you immediately." James felt a knot form in his stomach. His mind instantly flashed to the worst. Was it bad news about one of his parents? Was something wrong at the company? "Is everything all right?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "There are a few things you need to know about your children, Mr. Harrison." James froze. His throat went dry, and for a split second, his thoughts went completely blank. His mind struggled to grasp what the man on the other end of the line had said. "My children?" James repeated, the words coming out as a whisper. "I don't have any children." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then the voice spoke again, quieter, almost as if the man was choosing his words carefully. "I understand this is a lot to process, but you need to listen. We're talking about your twins. They are 3 years old now." James's mind exploded with confusion. Twins? He didn't have twins. Hell, he didn't even have one child, as far as he knew. He had never fathered a child. He and Amanda had discussed starting a family, but that was years away. How could this be happening? "I think you have the wrong person," James said, his voice tight with disbelief. "I'm not married to anyone who has twins." The voice on the other end didn't sound like it was buying it. "We know about the affair, Mr. Harrison. You're married to Amanda, but she's not the only one involved." James's stomach churned. The affair. How could they know about that? He'd been so careful, so meticulous in keeping it a secret. He and Laura had kept things under wraps for months, and the last thing he expected was for someone to confront him about it, especially about something like this. "I don't know what you're talking about," James said, his voice shaking now. "There are no twins. No children. I've never." "Mr. Harrison, please," the voice cut in sharply. "I know this is hard to believe, but I'm not here to discuss your personal life. I'm here to discuss your children. The twins are in danger." His blood ran cold. The voice on the phone wasn't some prank. Whoever this was, they knew too much. And there was no mistaking it, he was being dragged into something far deeper than he could comprehend. Something that involved his own family, his own blood. His thoughts scrambled, but he couldn't make sense of what was happening. "Who are you? What do you know?" James demanded, his words coming out in a rush. The voice paused, almost as if considering whether or not to answer. "I know you don't remember them. But your twins are real. They're alive. And we need your help." Before James could respond, the voice continued, "We'll be in touch soon, Mr. Harrison. Don't go to the authorities. Not yet." And then, without another word, the line went dead. James stood frozen, his hands still clutching the phone. His mind raced, trying to piece together what he had just heard. He didn't have children. He didn't even have a clear memory of an affair, at least not one that could have resulted in anything serious. He was careful, wasn't he? He didn't have a life outside of work and his strained marriage to Amanda. The idea of children, twins, no less, seemed impossible, like some twisted dream. His thoughts spiraled as he tried to regain his composure. His chest tightened, and he could feel the blood pounding in his ears. What had just happened? What was this about? He glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. He had no idea who to turn to. But one thing was clear, he had no choice but to get to the bottom of this. The next few days were a blur of confusion and anxiety. The phone call was all he could think about. He tried to contact the number that had called him, but it had already been disconnected. The voice from the other end had been so calm, so composed, but there was something undeniably unsettling about it. And the mention of twins, it kept ringing in his ears, over and over again. James went through his usual routine, work, dinner, and the empty silence that filled the house when Amanda wasn't home. But now, there was a gnawing sense of dread. The secrets he thought were buried deep were coming to the surface, and he was powerless to stop them. But the next phone call came sooner than he expected. This time, there was no warning. The phone rang again, and before James could even pick it up, he knew it was the same voice. His heart pounded as he answered the call. "Mr. Harrison," the voice said, sounding far too casual. "I hope you've been thinking about what we discussed. What do you want from me?" James asked, his voice thick with frustration. "We want your cooperation," the voice said calmly. "But first, we need you to understand something important. The twins are in danger, and you're the key to protecting them." "I don't understand," James said, his voice shaking now. "What do you mean? How am I involved in any of this?" The voice sighed, a sound of deep disappointment. "You were involved from the moment you made the decision to walk away. You see, Mr. Harrison, there's a lot you don't remember. And it's time you learned the truth." James's head spun. There was too much to take in. He felt as if he were drowning in questions, all leading to one unthinkable answer: everything he thought he knew about his life was wrong. And the worst part? He had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went. James sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in his hand. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to do something, anything, to get answers. But the more he tried to push through the confusion, the more it only deepened. His life had become a twisted version of something he couldn't recognize, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down on him. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on before everything fell apart. One thing was for sure, the phone calls were just the beginning. What he didn't know yet was that his world was about to be turned upside down, and the secrets hidden in the dark corners of his past were about to come to light. The questions kept building in his mind, faster than he could process. What had happened to the twins? Who was behind this? And, most haunting of all, what was he going to do when the truth finally emerged? But as he sat there, alone in the dark, one thing was clear: he could never go back to the life he had known before. There was no escape now. The mystery was only just beginning. This extended first part introduces the dramatic moment, sets up the suspense and mystery, and creates a strong hook to keep the reader wanting to know more. It establishes James's internal conflict and emotional struggle while hinting at the secrets to come. James couldn't stop thinking about the phone call. The shock had worn off, replaced by a gnawing, restless curiosity. He had told himself that he'd forget about it, move on, and just focus on his work, but the words kept echoing in his mind: twins, danger, you're the key to protecting them. Who were these people? How could they know about him, about his life, about something so unimaginable as children he never knew existed? He tried to stay busy the next day, meetings, emails, and the endless pressures of his high-stakes job. He told himself to push the thoughts to the back of his mind. But nothing worked. Every call he took, every conversation he had, his mind was elsewhere. It was as if a
shadow had fallen over his life, and it wasn't going to lift. That evening, after work, he found himself walking aimlessly through the city. His thoughts were in overdrive, bouncing between confusion and fear. He couldn't go back to his house with Amanda, where they'd had their last fight. The house now felt like a prison, and the idea of facing her with no answers about the phone call or the mysterious twins made him feel suffocated. As he walked, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an unknown number again. The same sense of dread crept through him, but this time, he was ready. He answered the call quickly, without hesitation. "Mr. Harrison," the voice greeted him, calm but distant. "I trust you're processing what we discussed." "Who the hell are you?" James demanded, his voice rising with frustration. "What do you want from me?" The voice on the other end sighed. "I know this is difficult, Mr. Harrison. But there's much more at play here than you realize. You're involved, whether you like it or not. The twins, your children, they're in serious danger. And your involvement is not just a coincidence." James clenched his fist, trying to remain calm. "I don't have children. I've never even seen these kids, let alone fathered them." Another pause, this one longer. "We know. The memory is locked away. But it's time you face the truth. You were involved with their mother. And you made choices that brought you into their lives, whether you remember it or not." A cold shiver ran down James's spine. Their mother? He barely managed to whisper the words. The idea of a past he didn't remember was overwhelming. "Who is she? How do you know all of this?" "We'll explain everything in time. But first, we need to meet. It's urgent. We have information you need to understand. This is bigger than just your family." "I'm done with games," James snapped, his voice rising. "Meet me now, and tell me who you are." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds before the voice responded. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. The address is in the email I just sent. Don't waste our time, Mr. Harrison." The line went dead. James stood still for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand. His body was trembling. Every instinct told him to back out, to pretend none of this was happening. But deep down, he knew he couldn't walk away. Too much had already been revealed, and the truth was just out of his reach. The next morning, James awoke with a sense of dread hanging over him. He had barely slept, tossing and turning as his mind replayed the phone call over and over again. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything in his life was about to change forever. After a quick shower and a cup of coffee, he grabbed his jacket and left the apartment, heading to the address in the email. The drive felt endless, each minute dragging on as his mind spiraled further into confusion. Where was he going? What was he going to find? And,
most importantly, who could possibly know about these twins? When he arrived at the address, he found himself outside a small, unmarked building in an industrial area. The place looked old, run down, and completely out of place compared to the high-rise offices and sleek buildings he was used to. A sense of unease crept through him as he parked his car and stepped out. This wasn't the kind of place anyone would choose for a legitimate meeting. He hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the car door. It felt like walking into a trap. But he had come this far, and there was no turning back now. With a deep breath, he made his way inside. The building smelled like dust and stale air. The hallway was dimly lit, the floor creaking beneath his feet as he walked. He found the door marked Room 3 at the end of the hall. Taking another deep breath, he knocked twice. A voice from inside called out. "Come in." James opened the door, stepping into a small, sterile room. A man sat at a table in the center of the room, his back to the door. He turned slowly as James entered, and James's stomach sank. The man was wearing a dark suit, his features sharp and calculating. His eyes, however, were the most unsettling part. There was something cold, almost lifeless, in them. "Mr. Harrison," the man said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I trust you're ready for the truth." James took a step forward, trying to steady his nerves. "I want answers," he demanded. "Who are you? And what's going on? What do you know about these twins?" The man motioned to the chair across from him. "Please, sit down. I'll explain everything." James sat, his mind racing. "I'm listening." The man folded his hands on the table. "You've been part of something bigger than you realize. Your life, Mr. Harrison, is not what it seems. The woman you were involved with, the mother of your children, her name is Isabel." James felt a pang of recognition. Isabel. The name rang a distant bell in his mind, but there were no memories to connect it to. No face, no events, just a name that felt strangely familiar. "Isabel," James repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who is she?" "She's someone you were once very close to. She's also the reason why your life has taken this turn." The man's tone was serious. "You had an affair with her 3 years ago. It was a complicated situation. But your connection with her has led to the birth of the twins." James shook his head, his thoughts spiraling. "I don't remember her. I don't remember any of this." "You wouldn't." "The memories were erased," the man said, leaning forward. "For your protection. And for theirs." James stared at him, trying to process what he was hearing. "Who erased my memories? And why?" The man sighed. "It's a long story, Mr. Harrison. One that involves forces far beyond what you understand. But I'll tell you this much, the twins are in danger because of what you don't remember. And it's only a matter of time before those forces find them." James was reeling. He could barely comprehend the words that were coming out of this man's mouth. Erased memories? The twins were in danger? What was he supposed to do with all this? "There's no time to waste," the man said, standing up. "You need to help us protect them. They're part of something important. And you're the only one who can help them now." James's world had just flipped upside down. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his marriage, and even himself, was now in question. There was no turning back. The danger was real, and the mystery of the twins was only beginning to unfold. As he stood up to leave, the man handed him an envelope. "This contains everything you need to know. Meet us at the address inside. We'll discuss your next steps." James took the envelope, his hands shaking. "What happens next?" The man's cold gaze fixed on him. "You either help us, or you'll lose everything." James left the room, his mind a blur of questions. His life had just taken a dark turn, and he had no idea where it would lead. But one thing was clear, the secrets of his past were catching up with him, and the truth was more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. James didn't know what he expected when he left the strange meeting. The man in the dark suit had given him a few pieces of a puzzle, but nothing made sense. His mind kept returning to the same questions. Why had his memories been erased? Why didn't he remember Isabel, or the twins? What danger were they in? The envelope the man had handed him was still in his pocket. His fingers brushed against it as he drove, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. He needed answers, yes, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to face the truth. The truth felt like a burden, a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. Every part of his life, every choice he had made, suddenly seemed irrelevant. He had always thought his wealth and success defined him, but now it felt like it was all built on lies. His phone buzzed again, pulling him from his spiraling thoughts. It was Amanda. "James," her voice came through, shaky and distant. "We need to talk." He closed his eyes for a second, his chest tightening. He didn't know what to expect, but the thought of facing her felt suffocating. They had already been through so much, and now this, whatever was happening to him, it was going to tear them apart. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Aren't you going to come home?" Amanda asked, her voice softer now. "We need to fix this. Whatever is happening to you, we'll figure it out together." Her words felt like a lifeline, but they also felt like they were coming from someone he didn't know anymore. Could he really trust her with the truth? Could he even trust himself? James ran his fingers through his hair, trying to decide what to do. It was a choice he hadn't planned to make, but the reality of the situation was undeniable. He needed to know what was going on, what the man at the meeting meant when he said, "You're the key to protecting them." But he also needed to confront the life he had left behind. The wife he barely recognized. The memories he couldn't access. The twins he never knew existed. "I'll be home soon," he said, hanging up the phone before Amanda could respond. The drive back was a blur. His thoughts were jumbled, each one crashing into the next. He had never been the kind of man to shy away from challenges, but this was different. This felt like he was being pulled into something much larger than himself, something he couldn't control. The truth he was seeking wasn't just buried in his past, it was locked away in his mind, in his memories, and that was where the real battle was. When he arrived at his apartment, he found Amanda sitting on the couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes were red, and she looked exhausted. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him as if waiting for him to speak. James stood by the door, unsure of how to begin. His body felt heavy, his mind scattered. How could he tell her about the phone call? About the man in the suit? About the twins? How could he explain the danger they were in, or the fact that he didn't even remember them? "Amanda," he said, his voice thick with hesitation. "There's so much I need to tell you. But I don't even know where to start." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stood up, her gaze hardening as she walked toward him. "Start with the truth, James. Just tell me what's going on. I can't stand this silence anymore." Her words hit him like a slap. He could feel the weight of her anger, the years of trust they had built up crumbling around them. The guilt gnawed at him, but at the same time, something inside him told him that this was his only choice. If he didn't face the truth now, he would lose everything. "I've been contacted by someone," he said, his voice shaky. "They know about the twins." Amanda froze. Her eyes widened as she took a step back, her hands trembling. "Twins," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "What twins? James, what are you talking about?" "I don't know," he said, the frustration boiling over. "I don't remember them, Amanda. But I'm told they're my children. I don't even know how that's possible." Amanda took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. "So you cheated on me?" Her voice cracked as she spoke the words. "You had kids with someone else?" James shook his head frantically. "No. I don't remember her, I don't remember any of it. My memories have been erased, Amanda. There's something much bigger going on here, something dangerous. I didn't ask for any of this." Amanda stepped back, her face pale. "Erased memories? James, this sounds insane. Are you telling me you're losing your mind?" "No," he said, the desperation rising in his voice. "I'm not crazy. I'm telling you the truth. I didn't know about the twins. I didn't even know about Isabel, the woman I was with. But now I have to find out who they are, what happened. They're in danger, and I don't know why. She looked at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. Tell me everything. All of it. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, feeling the weight of his secret finally lifting. He sat down beside her, his heart pounding. Then, he told her everything, the call, the man in the suit, the twins, the strange feeling of being caught in something much bigger than he could comprehend. When he finished, Amanda didn't speak right away. Instead, she stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The silence between them was deafening, but it was also heavy with a sense of urgency. She was processing everything, just as he had been doing for the past 24 hours. And even though she didn't say anything, James could feel the shift. He could feel the walls between them rising. I don't know what to believe, she said quietly, her back still turned to him. But I can't just sit here while you go off chasing shadows. If these kids are really yours, then we need to figure out how to protect them. And we need to do it together. James felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he wasn't alone in this. But the path ahead was still uncertain, filled with twists he couldn't predict. He was stepping into the unknown, and he had no idea where it would lead. I'll find the truth, Amanda, he said, his voice determined. I'll do whatever it takes to keep them safe. But I need your help. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also something else, something that felt like a spark of hope. Then let's find them. Together. Later that night, after a long conversation, James and Amanda sat together in silence. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The danger surrounding the twins was real, and the mystery of James's forgotten past was just beginning to unfold. As James stared out the window, his mind raced. He had no idea what would happen next, or how he was going to protect his children when he barely knew who they were. But one thing was certain, he couldn't ignore the past any longer. He had to face it head-on, no matter the cost. The next morning, James sat down at his desk and opened the envelope the man in the suit had given him. Inside was a folder with several documents, photographs, and a map of a secluded location. The handwriting on the cover page was simple and to the point. The twins are here. Follow the map. Time is running out. James's pulse quickened. He couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took was leading him closer to a truth he wasn't ready for. But there was no turning back now. The twins were out there, and it was up to him to find them before it was too late. James couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him as he stared at the map in front of him. The coordinates seemed innocent enough, nothing out of the ordinary. But something about the neat handwriting, the urgency in the message, sent a chill through him. Time is running out. The words seemed like a warning. What did that mean? And what was he walking into? Amanda sat across from him, studying the map just as intently. Her brow furrowed in concentration. She was determined to stay involved, to help him through this twisted web of confusion and betrayal. But James could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She was afraid, just as he was. And neither of them had any idea what was waiting for them at the end of this trail. We have to go, Amanda said, breaking the silence. Her voice was quiet but firm, like a quiet storm building just under the surface. If these twins are real, if they're yours, we have to find them, James. He nodded. But even as he agreed, his gut told him that the journey would lead them into a world neither of them could have ever imagined. Whatever happened at the coordinates would be a game-changer. He didn't know how it would affect his life, but he was certain that nothing would be the same afterward. Let's go then, he replied, his voice steady but with a sense of finality. We have no choice. The drive to the coordinates took them out of the city, farther and farther from the familiar streets, until the buildings were replaced by dense woods and barren fields. The quiet of the countryside was unnerving. It was the kind of place where secrets could easily be hidden, where the past could be buried beneath the layers of time and earth. James glanced at Amanda, who was sitting next to him in the passenger seat. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. He could feel her tension radiating off of her. The air in the car was thick with anxiety. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Amanda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," James admitted. "But we can't stop now. The truth, it's out there. We just have to find it." Her gaze shifted to the window, her face pale in the soft glow of the setting sun. The shadows stretched long, stretching out across the fields, as if the day itself was reluctant to end. She said nothing more, but James could tell she was thinking. She had to be thinking the same thing he was. What if we find the twins, and everything changes? The road eventually became a gravel path, winding through the woods. The trees grew thicker, blocking out most of the light from the sky. The map led them deeper into the forest, until the trees opened up to reveal a clearing. In the middle of the clearing was an old, dilapidated house, standing as if forgotten by time. James slowed the car, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the place. He parked the car at the edge of the clearing, and they both sat in silence for a moment, staring at the house. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up, the roof sagging under the weight of years of neglect. The place seemed to be holding its breath, as if it was waiting for something, or someone. Amanda was the first to speak. "This doesn't feel right, James. I don't like this." "I know," he said, his voice low. "But we have no choice. We have to see it through." He opened the car door and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. Amanda followed him, but her hesitation was evident in every step. They both walked toward the house slowly, the air growing colder as they neared it. Every instinct in James's body screamed at him to turn back, to forget the map, forget the twins, and just go home. But something kept him moving forward. Maybe it was the unknown, maybe it was the desperate need to know what had been hidden from him all these years, but he couldn't stop now. The front door of the house creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Dust hung in the air, and the smell of mildew filled his nose. The house had clearly been abandoned for years. The furniture was covered in sheets, and cobwebs hung from the corners like forgotten memories. James stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Amanda lingered behind him, her hand on the doorframe as if she were preparing to bolt at any moment. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tension between them was palpable. They moved further into the house, each room darker and more decayed than the last. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the walls lined with old, yellowing photographs that James couldn't make out. He felt like he was being led down a path that had already been walked by someone else, someone who had left these clues behind for him. Then, in the back of the house, they found it. A door, tucked away in a small, forgotten corner, stood slightly ajar. It was different from the rest of the house, newer, more solid. It seemed out of place in the decaying environment. James felt a chill run through him as he approached it. "Do you think we should open it?" Amanda asked, her voice tight with fear. James didn't answer right away. His hand hovered over the door handle, his mind racing. He had to open it. There was no other choice. This was the key to everything, the truth that had been buried for years. Whatever was behind that door was the final piece of the puzzle. He pushed the door open. Behind the door was a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, and on those shelves were boxes, papers, and files, so many files. A desk sat in the center, cluttered with more papers. But what caught his attention was a single photograph that lay on top of the pile. James walked over and picked it up. His hands shook as he gazed at the picture. It was an old photo of a woman he didn't recognize. But beside her, holding her hand, were two children, twins. A boy and a girl. They looked so familiar, but also like strangers. Amanda moved closer to him, peering over his shoulder. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the picture. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is this them?" He nodded, unable to speak. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of the past. This woman, the twins, were they real? Were they his? And why had he never known about them? But there was something else in the photo that sent a chill down his spine. In the background, partially obscured by the shadows, was a figure standing just out of focus. James couldn't make out who it was, but he could feel their presence. Someone was watching them. Before he could process what he had just seen, Amanda's voice broke through the silence. "James, look at this." She was standing by the desk, holding up a thick folder. The name on the cover made his heart skip a beat, Isabel Devereaux. James took the folder from her hands, his fingers trembling as he opened it. Inside were more photos, documents, notes about the twins, about Isabel. There were even medical records, legal papers, and a birth certificate. The twins were his, but that wasn't the part that made his stomach drop. No, what made him sick to his core was the last page. It was a letter, handwritten, dated just a year ago. The letter read, "James, I've kept the truth from you for far too long. The twins are yours, but they aren't safe. Someone has been watching us. They will stop at nothing to get what they want. You need to protect them. But time is running out. You need to act fast." There it was. The final warning. Time was running out. And just as James finished reading the letter, a sudden sound echoed through the house, a soft, almost imperceptible knock at the front door. They weren't alone. James's heart pounded in his chest as the soft knock echoed through the decaying house. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened so far. The twins, the letter, the mysterious woman in the photo, and now, this knock. Who was on the other side of the door? Were they friend or foe? And what did they want? Amanda's breath caught beside him, her body tense with fear. Her wide eyes locked onto his, silently asking the same questions. Neither of them spoke, the weight of the situation was too heavy for words. They were both acutely aware that the answers they sought, no matter how terrifying, were just within reach. They had come so far, and yet now, with the sound of that knock, it felt like they were on the precipice of something even darker. James knew they had to act quickly. Whoever was at the door, they couldn't afford to waste time. They had come too far to be caught unprepared. The letter had warned them. Time was running out. But the question was, what exactly was running out? "I'm going to check it out," James whispered to Amanda, his voice low and steady, though his pulse raced. Amanda nodded, gripping his arm for a split second before releasing him. "Be careful." He didn't have to tell her that he knew the dangers they were facing. The cold, tight grip of fear that had settled in the pit of his stomach said it all. They were walking straight into the unknown. James slowly approached the front door, every step cautious and deliberate. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on him, the atmosphere growing thicker with each passing second. The house, once abandoned, now felt alive with an unseen presence. He could almost hear the heartbeat of the place, thumping in rhythm with his own. Reaching the door, he paused. His hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment as he steeled himself for whatever lay on the other side. Without warning, the knock came again, louder this time, 3 quick raps. It sent a jolt of electricity through his body. With a deep breath, James opened the door. There, standing in the dim light, was a man. He wasn't tall, but his presence was undeniable. He wore a dark, nondescript jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His posture was rigid, his eyes hidden in the shadow of his cap, but James could feel the weight of his gaze. The man didn't move, he simply stood there, waiting. "Can I help you?" James asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline flooding his system. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, his gaze flickered past James, scanning the interior of the house. His eyes narrowed, as if looking for something, or someone. James's instincts screamed that something was off about this man, but he held his ground. "I'm looking for someone," the man finally said, his voice low and gruff. "A woman. Isabel Devereaux." James's breath hitched. The name sent a shock through his system, but he didn't let it show. "I don't know who that is," he lied, his heart pounding faster than before. He had to keep the man at bay. He couldn't let him inside. The man studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he turned and started to walk away, disappearing into the darkness. James stood frozen for a few moments, his mind racing. What was that about? But before he could process the encounter, Amanda's voice called out from inside the house, her tone tight with anxiety. "James, what's going on?" He quickly closed the door behind him, his mind still reeling from the strange encounter. He walked back to Amanda, his thoughts scattered. He was looking for Isabel. He knows her. He was asking questions. Amanda's face paled, and she took a step back. "But we haven't told anyone about Isabel, have we?" "No," James replied, shaking his head. "No one knows about her." "Not yet." "Then how did he?" "I don't know," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't shake the feeling that the knock was just the beginning. That man hadn't just been looking for Isabel. He'd been searching for something else, something more. And James had a sinking feeling that it was directly tied to the twins. Amanda swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. What if he knows something about the twins? What if they're in danger? James clenched his fists, his anger rising. "I won't let anything happen to them. We need to find out everything we can about Isabel and the twins. We need to know who that man was and why he's looking for them." Amanda nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to keep pushing forward, James. We can't let this mystery consume us, but we can't stop now either." James didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed the folder from the desk, flipping through it again, searching for any clue that might give him a lead. The more he looked, the more the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The documents, the photos, the letter, all of it was leading them towards something bigger. Something dangerous. He paused when he found another document buried near the bottom of the folder. It was a letter, written in a hurried, frantic hand. James's fingers trembled as he unfolded it. "James. If you're reading this, then you've come too close to the truth. The twins are not just a part of your past, they are part of something much larger, something that you are not prepared for. I have made terrible mistakes, and now I must do everything in my power to protect them. But you need to understand, there are people who will stop at nothing to control them. They cannot be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. Time is running out, and I fear I do not have much longer. Please, James, do not trust anyone, not even me. Isabel." James's heart sank as the words hit him like a physical blow. Whoever was after the twins wasn't just after a family secret, they were after power. And Isabel's cryptic warning only confirmed what James had feared all along. There were forces at play that were far beyond his understanding. But there was one thing he knew for sure, he couldn't let the twins fall into the wrong hands. The room felt colder now, the weight of the letter heavy in his hands. He could feel Amanda's gaze on him, but he didn't look up. His mind was spinning, piecing together the puzzle in a way he never thought possible. Isabel's warning had been clear, time was running out. And now, it was up to him to make sure the twins, his children, were protected. But as James stood there, holding the letter, a new sound reached his ears. A soft scuffling, like footsteps in the distance. It was coming from outside the house. Someone else was here. Someone who hadn't knocked. James's pulse quickened, his senses on high alert. Without a word, he grabbed Amanda's arm and pulled her toward the back of the house. They had to get out, they had to move, or they would be trapped. But as they rounded the corner of the house, they saw them. A group of men, standing in the clearing, their faces obscured by the darkness. There were at least 5 of them, all armed. James's stomach dropped. There was no escape now. They were surrounded. The air was thick with the sound of distant whispers, the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. James stood frozen in the shadows, the heavy weight of the situation bearing down on him. 5 men stood in the clearing, their figures shrouded in darkness, as if they had materialized from the very night itself. There was no mistaking their intent, these weren't just strangers. These men were here for a reason. And that reason was clear. They were after the twins. James's heart raced, the blood pounding in his ears as his mind worked furiously to calculate his next move. There was no time to waste. He could feel the eyes of the men on him, even in the darkness. He knew that any wrong move could be their last. His pulse surged with a mix of fear and adrenaline as he looked at Amanda, who stood beside him, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. The men weren't far from the house now. They were methodical, their movements deliberate as they spread out, searching. It was as if they had done this before. It was clear they weren't just looking for Isabel, they were looking for the twins, and they would do anything to get them. Amanda, James whispered urgently, his voice barely audible. We need to move, now. Amanda nodded, her face hardening as she took in the gravity of the situation. She was no longer the frightened woman she had been moments ago. The danger was real, and she knew they had no choice but to face it head-on. Without another word, James grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the woods, away from the clearing where the men were still searching. Their footsteps were light, but every sound seemed deafening in the quiet of the night. The cold air bit at their skin as they pushed through the underbrush, the sound of their breath heavy in the silence. But just as they thought they might have gained some distance, a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Stop right there. James froze. The man's voice wasn't just loud, it was authoritative, unmistakable in its power. Whoever he wasn't just one of the men in the clearing, he was the leader. Amanda squeezed James's hand, her eyes wide with fear. They both knew that if they were caught, there would be no escape. The men would take them, and whatever answers they had hoped to find would be lost forever. James's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. There had to be something they could do, some way out of this. He scanned the area around them, looking for cover, anything that could give them an edge. Then, he spotted it, a narrow trail leading deeper into the woods. It was barely visible, hidden by the overgrown trees and bushes, but it was there. It was their only chance. We run. James whispered, barely daring to breathe. When I say go, we run. Trust me. Amanda gave a single nod, her eyes determined. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. Go. James hissed, and without hesitation, they both sprinted toward the trail. The underbrush whipped at their legs, but they pushed forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring everything except the need to survive. Behind them, the leader's voice echoed again. After them. Don't let them get away. James didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The pounding of his heart, the rush of adrenaline in his veins, everything inside him was focused on one thing: escape. The trail was winding and uneven, but it seemed to be leading them somewhere. James didn't know where, but he hoped it was away from the men who were hunting them. The trees grew denser, the path narrowing as they ventured deeper into the woods. Amanda's breath was ragged beside him, but she kept up, determined to stay with him. James knew she was scared, but she wasn't slowing down. That made two of them. They rounded a sharp bend in the path, and suddenly, the ground beneath them gave way. James's foot slipped on a loose stone, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to tilt. He reached out to steady himself, but it was too late. He felt his body tipping forward, and then he was falling, plummeting downward. "Amanda!" he shouted, reaching for her, but the next thing he knew, he was crashing into something hard, something cold. The world spun as he hit the ground with a violent thud. His chest constricted with the impact, and for a moment, he could barely catch his breath. But he forced himself to sit up, panic clawing at his chest. Where was Amanda? "Amanda," he gasped, looking around in the darkness. "James." Her voice came from below, faint but unmistakable. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the pain in his side as he scrambled toward her voice. "Amanda." He reached out, his hands brushing against her arm as he pulled her up from the ground. "I'm okay," she said, but her voice shook. That was too close. What now? James's mind was spinning. He had no answers, no clear plan. They had just narrowly escaped, but the men would be searching for them. They had to keep moving, keep running, or they would be caught. "We have to keep going," he said, his voice gruff. "We can't stop now. We're close. I can feel it." Amanda nodded, and together they moved further into the woods. It was slow going, the terrain rough and the darkness nearly complete. But there was no turning back. Not now. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time lost meaning as they moved deeper into the forest, pushing through the trees, the underbrush, with no idea where they were headed. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath their feet and their labored breathing. But even that seemed to fade as they walked, the world around them becoming a blur of shadows and silence. Then, just as James thought they couldn't take another step, they saw it. A light. A faint glow through the trees, distant but unmistakable. It was a small beacon, and it looked like the only hope they had left. James's heart skipped a beat. "Do you see that?" he whispered to Amanda. She nodded, her face set in determination. "We're not stopping. Not now." They pushed forward, the light growing brighter as they moved toward it. The wood seemed to open up, the trees thinning until they reached a clearing. There, in the middle of the clearing, was a cabin. The cabin was small, rustic, and worn with age, but it looked like it had been lived in. The light was coming from a small window, and James could see the faint glow of a fire inside. Amanda glanced at him, her expression uncertain. "What do we do?" "We need answers," James said, his voice firm. "We need to find out what's going on, and I think this cabin can help us." They approached the cabin cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the grass beneath their feet. The door was slightly ajar, and they hesitated for a moment before James pushed it open. The creak of the door echoed in the night, but there was no movement from inside. James stepped inside, his eyes scanning the small room. It was simple, nothing extravagant. A fire burned in the corner, casting shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and something else, something familiar, though James couldn't place it. At the far end of the room, a figure sat in a chair, facing the fire. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge their presence. But James knew, without a doubt, that this person held the key to everything. "Isabel," he called out softly. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that James would never forget. It was Isabel. Her eyes were dark, filled with secrets, but she was alive. And she knew exactly who they were. The fire crackled softly in the corner, casting long shadows that danced along the wooden walls of the cabin. The room smelled of smoke and the earthiness of the woods, but it wasn't the cabin or the fire that held James's attention. It was Isabel. She sat there, facing them, her eyes shadowed by the flickering light. Her posture was rigid, but her eyes were haunted, as if she had been carrying a weight for far too long. James and Amanda stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. Every part of their journey had led them here, to this moment, and now, they had come face to face with the woman who held all the answers. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt oppressive, thick with years of unspoken words. Finally, James took a step forward, his voice breaking the stillness. "Isabel," he said again, this time with more urgency. "Isabel, we need to know the truth. What's going on? Why are these men after the twins? Why are they hunting us?" Isabel didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward them, her eyes narrowing. There was a coldness in her gaze now, something calculating. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice low but steady. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. No idea who you're really up against." James's chest tightened, and for a split second, he wanted to turn and run, to leave this cabin and forget everything. But he couldn't. He couldn't leave without the answers. "We're not leaving without the truth," Amanda said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Tell us everything. We deserve to know." Isabel's lips pressed into a thin line, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. James could see the conflict there, the pull between the truth and the fear that seemed to have paralyzed her for so long. Finally, she exhaled sharply and stood, walking toward the fire. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I didn't want you to get involved," she began slowly. "But it's too late now. You've already stumbled too far into this mess. There's no turning back." James stepped closer, his heart racing. "What mess?" "The twins," Isabel's voice faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "The twins are part of something bigger than any of us. They were born into a situation that should have never happened. But it did. And now, there are people who will do anything to control them. To control their power." James's brow furrowed. "What power? What are you talking about?" Isabel's eyes darkened. She took a deep breath and turned to face them, her expression hardening. "The twins are not just children. They're something else. Something much more dangerous. They were part of an experiment, a genetic project created by a group of powerful individuals who wanted to create a new breed of human. A breed with abilities that could change the world." Amanda took a step back, her face pale. "You're saying, the twins are part of a genetic experiment?" "Yes," Isabel replied. "And that's why you've been hunted. You and your family are connected to this project in ways you don't even understand. I tried to protect you. I tried to keep you all safe. But it was never enough." James felt his stomach drop. "What does that mean? Why didn't you tell me?" Isabel's gaze softened, but there was still a hardness there, a certain sorrow in her eyes. "Because I never wanted you to be part of this. I never wanted you to know the truth. But now, there's no choice. You found out too much. And if you don't act, the twins will be taken. And nothing will stop them from using them for their own purposes." James's mind spun. He couldn't keep up. The twins, the genetic experiment, the people who were after them, it was all too much. "Who's after them?" he demanded. "Who are these people? Who's controlling all of this?" Isabel's eyes flickered to the fire, the flames casting a strange, almost eerie light across her face. "They call themselves the Order. They're a group of powerful individuals who have been manipulating events for years. They've infiltrated governments, corporations, even law enforcement. They pull the strings from the shadows, and they have one goal: control. Control over the world, control over power, and control over the twins. Amanda's voice trembled as she spoke. But why? Why the twins? Why are they so important? Isabel closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were filled with a deep, unbearable sadness. Because the twins are the key to everything. Their abilities, they're not just genetic. They're tied to something much older, something hidden deep in history. A power that could destroy everything. The Order believes that if they can control the twins, they can control that power. James's blood ran cold. And that's why they're after us? Because of the twins? Yes, Isabel said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's not just about them anymore. It's about you, too, James. You're tied to this. You always have been. James blinked, confused. What do you mean? Isabel hesitated again, as if weighing whether or not to continue. Finally, she spoke, her words laced with a painful truth. You were part of the experiment, James. You were always meant to be. Your connection to the twins, it wasn't a coincidence. You and they are linked in ways that go beyond family. Beyond blood. Amanda looked at James, her face full of shock. What? How is that even possible? James's mind was racing. You're saying I'm part of this too? That I have something to do with these experiments? Isabel nodded, her expression grim. Yes. Your DNA was used in the creation of the twins. You were part of the original trial. That's why you're here, why you're involved in all of this. They needed you. And now, they need the twins. And if they have them. She let the words trail off, the implications too horrible to voice. James staggered back, the weight of the revelation crashing down on him. So everything I've known, my life, my family, it's all a lie. Not a lie, Isabel corrected softly. But a carefully orchestrated truth. You were never supposed to know. But now you do. And it's time to make a choice. A choice that will determine the future. James looked at Amanda, her face filled with fear and confusion. She had been pulled into this without warning, without knowing the truth. But now, she was just as entangled as he was. And they had no way out. What choice? James asked, his voice barely a whisper. The choice to fight, Isabel said. To fight the Order. To protect the twins. To keep them safe. James's heart pounded in his chest as the full weight of the decision hit him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something far bigger. It was about power, control, and the future of the twins. He looked at Amanda, and in that moment, they both understood. There was no turning back. They had already crossed the point of no return. We fight, James said, his voice filled with resolve. Amanda nodded, her eyes fierce. We fight. Isabel met their gazes, her expression hardening into one of determination. Then prepare yourselves. The war is only just beginning.